Dead Money's bleak tone, dark atmosphere, and survival horror gameplay was a complete departure from anything seen before or after in the series' history. It's considered by many to be one of the best fall DLCs ever made, but like most of New Vegas, it was once planned to be even grander. This is the development and cut content of Dead Money. Dead Money was initially released as a Xbox 360 exclusive on December 21st, 2010. It's unknown exactly when Dead Money's development began, but it was conceptualized during the core game's development, as there are both narrative and visual hooks to Elijah and the Sierra Madre in the Mojave. An early remnant of the DLC is even present in the core game, a low-detail static collection called Villa Test, and it's an early version of Dead Money's Villa world space. It's really cool this still exists, and it shows off a brightly lit version of the area, something you never get to see in-game. Parts of the architecture found in Dead Money use the same prefix as the cut Caslo Hotel lobby cell I mentioned earlier in the series. This is the cell where the game's cut random spawning system was tested. It doesn't seem like a coincidence that these assets share the same prefix, and it's likely this cut area was used as a testing ground for the Sierra Madre. On the other hand, it's possible these assets were originally intended for the core game, but were cut and then later recycled for Dead Money. Early code for the DLC is dated in late September, but the majority of the team continued to work on bug fixes for the core game's first patch. This means Dead Money's development essentially took place in just 2 short months. Even during that 2-month period, some of the development team worked on Dead Money very little, as area designer Robert Lee revealed. Because I was one of the few key team members left behind to work on in-game polish and bug fixing for the core game, I didn't get to do a ton of work on Dead Money aside from the Dog/God and Christine boss fights, and loot placement and balancing. But I did most of the special gameplay prototyping like the Ghost People zombie mechanic. As the rest of the team moved on to Honest Hearts, I stayed behind again to kill bugs and ensure Dead Money went out the door as cleanly as possible. When I spoke with area designer Robert Lee, he recounted suggesting the name Dead Money when the name Chris Avallone had picked was already copyrighted. During my interview with Chris Avallone, I asked him about the original title. Dead Money's original title was Dead Man's Hand, which suited the DLC content much more than Dead Money. Bethesda originally thought they could get the trademark to Dead Man's Hand when we suggested it, then it turned out they couldn't, so we settled on Dead Money. Disappointing, but there you go. An early script still calls the DLC Dead Man's Hand, and the texture for the armor you start the DLC wearing is called Dead Man's Jumpsuit. This is a reference to the poker hand that Wild Bill Hickok supposedly had right before he was killed, and the name would have fit well for the DLC. Despite the original title being cut, there's still an homage to it in the form of a challenge of the same name, which requires the player to collect Wild Bill Hickok's infamous hand, the Ace and 8 of Spades, as well as the Ace, Queen, and 8 of Clubs. Speaking of Dead Money's caravan cards, there's a full set of 52 cards, but only 21 of them were actually placed in-game. The others can't be bought from vendors either, so over half of these are unattainable. There's an unused empty dialogue topic called Christine Killed Elijah, revealing that Obsidian considered an ending where Christine got revenge against Elijah. A cut ending slide was even made for it, and it depicts Christine standing over Elijah's dead body. Intrigued, I asked Chris Avallone about this cut ending. I think we considered this because that's Christine's goal, but it wasn't feasible if you trapped him in the vault or killed him yourself, so we cut it. There's also 5 additional unused ending slides. These were alternate slides that were cut from existing endings. For instance, this slide of Hoover Dam was cut from the ending where the player joins Elijah, and a different slide was used in its place. There are also 2 unused voiced endings in the game files. In Elijah's cut ending, he kills the player and then attacks the inhabitants of the Mojave. There is an ending in the final game where the player is trapped inside the vault and dies, but it's narrated by Christine instead.
A slip of the tongue led to the courier's death. Unable to detonate his victim's collar from a distance, Elijah chose another method. The murder took days to plan and less than a minute to execute. Reprogramming the casino's ventilation system, Elijah turned the vault into a gas chamber, filling it with the cloud and killing the courier. In the years that followed, the legend of the Sierra Madre faded, and there were no new visitors to the city. Years later, when a mysterious blood-red cloud began to roll across the Mojave, then west toward the Republic, no one knew where it had come from. Only that it brought death in its wake. Attempts to find the source of the toxic cloud failed. Eventually, the last vestiges of NCR faded from the Mojave and the west, wiping the slate clean.
Christine's cut ending lines are also an alternate take on the ending where the player is trapped inside the vault.
Christine's mission to kill the one who controlled their collars, even at the cost of her own life, trapped the courier inside the casino vault. The elevator door never opened, and no objectives appeared on the Pip-Boy screen to guide the courier to freedom. The Sierra Madre became the courier's grave. Not long after the courier's death, however, a new hologram appeared in the Sierra Madre lobby, standing, waiting to greet new guests to the casino. In some respects, the hologram of the courier paid respect to the one person ever to breach the Sierra Madre vault, a means of allowing even the dead to begin again.
Like the core game companions, Dead Money's companions have reactions to being lit on fire, but there's no code to actually trigger these lines.
Oh, get a rug, put me out, something.
No! Fire.
Christine's line would have had no sound and reads, Christine begins to beat at the flames on her body. Each companion has lines when fleeing from combat, but since their confidence is set to foolhardy, they'll never flee in combat, meaning these lines can't be triggered either.
Valor, you're up. Discretion and me, we're out of here.
Find a defensible position. We'll kill them there.
Christine's line reads, Christine shakes her head, waves at you to follow. They also have lines for yielding in combat when the player puts away their weapon, but despite trying to trigger them multiple times, I couldn't get these to play either. Christine's line reads, Christine checks herself, stops attacking, looks angry, points at collar.
Fine, fine. Don't want us both blowing up, anyway.
Next time, I'll break your legs and hang you from the Madre gates.
Finally, they have lines for their weapons being ineffective in combat, but your companions only fight ghost people in this DLC, and all ghost people have a damage threshold of 0, so I don't think these lines can be played either.
Song and dance might work better than what I've got.
Can't hurt this one. Give me something that will.
Christine's dialogue reads, Christine taps her weapon angrily, assumes defensive stance. In a Formspring post, Josh Sawyer revealed why DLC companions can't travel back to the core game. Script is used to manage companions joining/leaving the party. It is done in many places throughout the game, and is often done by specific IDs, i.e., it is not a generic add/remove companion function. The designers handled this in FNV because our roster of companions only changed once, Ulysses. We can't directly patch DLC content, and can't reference and script anything in the update from the DLC or vice versa. This means that any companions we might add in the DLC, if brought back into the Mojave, would not be covered by the scripts that are made for the core FNV game. There are 4 early loading screens in Dead Money's texture files. It seems these sketches were used as placeholders during development, but there was never time to complete them. This also implies they wanted to include loading screens for the other DLCs as well. During my interview with Chris Avallone, I asked him about it. Yes, we wanted to have unique stills for the loading screens and opening/ending slides of each DLC, and that was the intention. Those slides were likely made by Joe Sanabria, our art director for the DLCs. These loading screen drawings are really dope, and it's a shame they never had time to finish them. Due to time and resource constraints, future DLCs like Honest Hearts had to use in-game screenshots during their intros and endings. They still worked, but didn't have the same effect as Dead Money's incredible intro sequence. There's a cut NPC named White Arrowheart Dude. The name White Arrowheart implies this NPC was responsible for the hidden caches of items found throughout the villa, each of which is marked by a graffiti heart pierced by an arrow. His base health is set to 0, which would have caused him to spawn dead. His inventory is unfortunately empty, leaving his backstory a complete mystery. The same naming prefix is used for some of Dead Money's graffiti, and was presumably all created by him. 2 of these were never placed anywhere in the world. One reads Old World Blues, and the other reads Soul for Sale. There's graffiti in the abandoned Brotherhood of Steel bunker that seems to be a reference to this cut character. A heart pierced by an arrow and text that reads, "Left my heart at the Sierra Madre." Despite being cut, this character is specifically mentioned at the Puesta del Sol switching station in a note named "See you in hell, asshole. Hope you're about dead when you read this. Sierra Madre out of reach. Could have had it all. Followed that white arrow graffiti bastard down here. Left those bear traps as presents for you on trail. Hope you like them, shithead. Hit my own tripwire. You came to take what's mine? Too bad. I got the last laugh. Speakers will kill you before you get out, then we'll settle things in hell. Sierra Madre's treasure, mine, mine, mine. Considering this NPC laid traps inside the switching station, it's very likely that White Arrowheart Dude didn't make it out alive, and that his body would have been found inside here too. He would have been perhaps the only truly altruistic character in the DLC, and his death would have further reinforced Dead Money's hopeless atmosphere, so it's too bad he never made it in. During my interview with Chris Avallone, I asked him about this cut NPC. Early on, we tried to make sure each graffiti style in the Sierra Madre was characteristically written/painted by one particular person, and there were multiple people with multiple styles, but we marked them to keep them consistent and also the text they wrote also consistent. For example, I believe there's one jerk who keeps trying to get everyone else killed. White Arrowheart Dude was one of these people, and he was associated with the Arrowheart style. You might find their bodies, but there was never an actual NPC present and alive. I can't remember the full list, but it was all based on a graffiti concept art storyboard piece that Brian Menzies put together, and then we associated personalities to each graffiti style. The Holorifle is one of the most powerful energy weapons in New Vegas, and it's given to the player at the start of Dead Money. It seems the player once started the DLC either unarmed or with some entirely different weapon, as the Holorifle wasn't added to the quest code until later in development. Originally, Elijah told the player about the weapon, and then a marker would lead the player to the Holorifle somewhere in Easttown. After finding it, the player would receive 300 experience, and Elijah would say some lines about it being recovered. This was an optional objective, and this change would have made the start of the DLC more difficult, and perhaps the entire DLC more difficult if the player never retrieved it. To initiate the Gala event, the player is forced to activate 2 holograms to protect Dean Domino from the ghost people. There's an unused variable for the player giving their Holorifle to Dean, and it seems this was an alternative to activating the holograms. It's unknown if Dean would have given the Holorifle back to the player after the completion of this quest, or if he would have kept it. It would have been amazing if Dean used the player's Holorifle against them later in the DLC. Finally, Josh Sawyer revealed that the concept of the Holorifle was much different than how it ended up appearing. It was initially, always, designed to be a grenade launcher that Elijah adapted for his own wacky purposes, loading in microfusion cells and ejecting them like spent shells. Something I wish we could have done to make it stand out more, but could not do for technical reasons, is make the ejected MFCs look like smoking burned out batteries. A shotgun locker container was made for the police station, but it was never actually placed anywhere. It would have given the player a lever-action shotgun, 20 gauge shells, and some pre-war money. There's also a large number of unused containers meant for other areas in the villa and casino. There's a cut note called Vending Machine Code Police Pistol. This reveals it was once going to be possible to exchange chips for a police pistol, but it was also never placed anywhere. I suspect both the containers and police pistol code were deliberately cut to make the DLC more difficult. It just wouldn't be New Vegas if there weren't some objects placed outside the playable area. In one of the villa cells, a light can be found beneath the ground. Presumably the developer who placed it here meant to move it back above ground at some point, but never did. Near the fountain in the villa, there's an out-of-balance terminal and radio, which are used behind the scenes to play ambient music and control the radio signals that blow up the player's collar. Not far from here, there's a junk pile placed beneath the ground that you can normally never see. If you clip out of bounds in the southeastern part of the villa map, you'll find a second out-of-bounds junk pile. This one is very far away from the playable area, so I'm not sure how it ended up out here. There's also 2 out-of-bounds posters in Puesta del Sol South. There is no nav mesh on the ground around them, so I assume they were intended to appear in the room directly above them. There's an out-of-bounds issue of Duck and Cover not far from where Dean Domino was first met. This would have been useful for low-level players, but it's impossible to reach in the final game. There's an NPC named Narrator that the player will never see during normal play. Voice lines have to be played from somewhere, either by an NPC or talking activator, and this NPC is used to play some of Dead Money's intro and ending slide dialogue. There's a door directly beneath the radio in the abandoned Brotherhood of Steel bunker. This is used when the player travels back to the Mojave after leaving the Sierra Madre. There's a small room disconnected from the main area in the casino's vault. It's used to hold Elijah before he comes after the player. Once the player uses the vault terminal, he's warped to the elevator door. I love getting to see how New Vegas works behind the scenes. There's some entertaining notes left in the game's code by the developers. Christine's class is called Tech Wizard, Dean's class is called Lounge Lizard, and Elijah's class is Tech Merlin. A note in Dog/God's companion script reads, "If Dog is in combat, we can assume someone is going to die. Wink." A note in another script reads, "Player was a jerk, Christine will remember that." The main testing ground for the DLC seems to have been a world space called Test Map 01, but unfortunately everything in these cells was deleted before release, leaving much of the testing process a mystery. There's an interesting test cell called Stealth Test, which is an early version of Puesta del Sol South. It was copy and pasted from the cell that appears in-game, then repurposed for testing the ghost people stealth detection and patrol behavior. There's another test cell called Toxic Cloud Test that was used to test the various traps found in Dead Money. There's a dead body, some holograms, traps, a large section covered by the cloud, and perhaps most notably, a barrel that isn't used anywhere in the DLC. It's only ever used in one area outside of the test cell at Takata Cup Mine, and its inclusion in this cell might mean there were plans for a barrel-based trap, or it might just be a random fucking barrel. There's several versions of holograms that show them in various stages of their development. Some of them bleed when attacked, others can be spoken to, and some even carry holographic laser pistols instead of the unique laser attack they use in-game. Interestingly, the hostile holograms all have unarmed and melee as tag skills, even though they use no close-range attacks. There's a test NPC called Tasty Morsel. Tasty Morsel was used by the developers to test Dog eating the corpses of ghost people. In the final game, the collar immediately explodes if the player attacks a companion before they join their party. Elijah has a cut line that was once played when the player did this. He would say the line, and then a countdown for the collar to explode would start.
I warned you to cooperate. Now I'll have to begin again.
This was a great idea, except that it could result in a save-destroying bug. The player could attack a companion and trigger the collar explosion countdown, but still have enough time to travel to a new area. This would overwrite their autosave right before they exploded, forcing the player to return to an earlier save, and potentially lose hours of progress. The code for this is completely functional, but it's disabled, and has a note that reads, "Obsolete. Player could make an autosave, resulting in unavoidable death if he used that save." The terminal found inside the Sierra Madre's vault has three very interesting cut options: retrieve holographic technology data, retrieve vending replicator schematics, and retrieve atmospheric systems analysis. The submenus for these options were unfortunately never set up, and it's unknown how they would have been implemented. Intrigued, I asked Chris Avalone. So I don't fully recall, but since these three options were things that Elijah was looking for, we may have intended to leave them there so it provided confirmation that Elijah could, in fact, obtain the data from the vault. I think the problem with this is that if we gave the option for the player to download this, the question becomes the player would want to do something with the data, and that would have huge consequences for the Mojave and the Fallout world, which didn't seem like a good idea at the time. During Chris Avalone's GDC 2012 presentation, he shared some concept art and design documents that have never been shown elsewhere as far as I'm aware. Unfortunately, the quality of this video isn't great, but it's still so cool to see concept art that has never been released publicly. This design document breaks the DLC down into 4 acts. The first act is finding Dean, Christine, and Dog/God, and then bringing them to the fountain. It also shows that Dean Domino's name was originally Freddy Nine's Domino. The second act revolves around triggering the gala event and getting inside the casino. The third act takes place inside the casino, and this document mentions a rooftop bar area, but there's no area you could really classify as a rooftop bar in the casino in the final game, suggesting this entire area was cut at some point in development. Concept art shown later on in the presentation revealed that Dean Domino had hair in his early design. He's bald in the final game, but a remnant of this original design still exists in the Assemble Your Team achievement art. Elijah's concept art shows that he has crazy mad scientist hair, just like his hologram depiction. Unfortunately, in order to make Elijah's character model look old, they had to change his race to Caucasian old-aged. This race has wrinkles and looks older, but has access to fewer hairstyles, forcing the development team to give him lame combed hair. During this presentation, a slide mentioned that certain companions had advantages over the ghost people, and Christine's advantage was that she looked/sounded like the Verakeys hologram. This seemingly implies that the ghost people were intended to treat her differently in combat, but in the final game there's no code for this behavior. In one of the ending slides, the ghost people even leave Christine alone due to her resemblance to Vera.
Over time, the ghost people came to see her as one of the holograms. They would watch, silently, as she walked among them.
During my interview with Chris Avalone, I asked him about it. Yes, that was cut. I think the only reason for the end slide is that Christine needed her voice back in order for the ghost people to realize the connection, and since her getting a new voice doesn't happen until Act 3, where everything happens within the casino, and no real interactions with ghost people with her in the party, there wasn't really a reason to do it earlier in the game because Christine doesn't look like Vera, but once she sounds like Vera, that's different. Note that even in the end slide, it takes the ghost people some time to equate her to Vera as well. The construction workers of the Sierra Madre were transformed by the cloud into a terrifying tribe of nearly immortal zombies. Very little is known about them, and this mystery makes them one of the most intriguing enemies in the game. They were once intended to have some unique behavior that would have further differentiated them from other enemies as well. The ghost people were meant to be drawn to the holograms found throughout the DLC and worship them, allowing the player to sneak past them and avoid combat. AI packages were assigned to various ghost NPCs, code was written, and markers were placed in several areas like the fountain inside the casino lobby, the fountain near the police station, and Dog/God's location during the Gala quest. However, the triggers were never placed, so this can occur in the final game. You can activate the holographic greeter inside the casino lobby, and the ghost people do congregate around it, but again, the worship trigger isn't placed, so the worship behavior never occurs as intended. The unused code has a note that reads, "This script is placed in trigger hologram worship trigger, which should be placed over a large area around the fountains in the villa with holograms that can be enabled. The trigger is initially disabled and gets enabled along with the hologram. When enabled, it will count all ghost people inside it as entering, and those not in combat will be set to non-aggressive and help no one. They will also reset their AI and hopefully switch to a worship package that makes them use one of the idol markers found around the fountain. If the player gets too close to the fountain, they'll enter a trigger linked to this one that activates this one, flipping variable pissed. It then disables this trigger for a frame and re-enables it to make it run on all the ghost people again, making them hostile. Despite being cut, this behavior is still mentioned several times in game. Dog has a line where he specifically mentions the ghost people worshipping holograms.
As long as the holographic greeter outside is active, however, I can get by them. The holograms fascinate them. Ghost worship, perhaps.
One of the loading screens states, "The origins of the ghost people are a mystery, as is their strange reverence of the holographic ghosts that fill the city streets." Finally, Elijah has a cut unrecorded line that reads, "The villa inhabitants seem obsessed with the holograms. Use it to distract them." One of the slides from GDC 2012 showed that the worship mechanic was a major aspect of their design. This was a great idea that would have made the DLC easier for stealth-based players, and more importantly, would have made the ghost people into a more interesting enemy.
The quick scribe jumped over the lazy paladin.
Dead Money has some notable mistakes that are likely due to its development being rushed. Each of the companions and Elijah were meant to have a lot more to say on their radio frequencies while in different stages of the main quest. Several oversights led to many of these lines never playing, however, but thankfully this was restored by the mod Asterra's Many Fixes. All of the mods mentioned throughout this video can be found below in the description. The police pistol isn't affected by the cowboy perk or the professional perk, even though it should be by their descriptions. Many other DLC weapons aren't affected by perks that should affect them, while other weapons don't count towards challenges that they should affect. The police pistol texture file has an intriguing, unused section for what appears to be a silencer. The UV map isn't placed on this part of the texture, and there's no model for a unique silenced version in the game files. This suggests there were plans for the police pistol to have mods, something it doesn't have in the final game. The UV map for the police pistol is also rushed, and has some really bad texture stretching. It seems Obsidian simply didn't have time to finish the weapon model completely or mods for it. Elijah's robes are blue, but its world model was never updated, so if you drop them, the item appears red. The ending where the player and Elijah team up has a cut line that was never recorded. It reads, "In the years that followed, communities across the West began to die as traces of the cloud began to drift over lands held by the NCR." In the final game, the first line of the ending is strangely repeated here instead. In the years that followed, the legend of the Sierra Madre faded, and there were no new visitors to the city. I suspect the original line was never recorded by mistake, and they reused an existing line instead. The blade of the knife spear clean weapon looks exactly like the regular knife spear. There is a clean texture for the knife spear, but it was never applied to the blade, resulting in it looking much less interesting than it was intended to. Both the knife spear clean and throwing knife spear are strangely marked as player only, meaning they can't be used by your companions. The superheated cosmic knife was meant to have a glow map, but it's not actually included in Dead Money's game files. A glow map is a texture that specifies which part of a weapon glows. Due to this being missing, the entire weapon glows, even though only the blade was meant to have the effect. Each of your companions regenerates their health outside of combat, except for God. He was meant to regenerate health, but the scripts that handle this only applies the effect to Dog, making it much more difficult to keep God alive. When you ask Christine what skill she's proficient in, she'll tell you she's versed using energy weapons, unarmed, melee weapons, guns, and explosives. She's totally lying though, and her only tagged weapon skills are energy and melee weapons. She ironically has very low skills for the other weapons she mentions knowing how to use. Dean Domino has a line where he suggests you should kill the ghost people by shooting their gas bombs.
Once I fired a lucky shot, hit a gas tank one was holding, blew his arm off at the shoulder, and he didn't get back up. So if you're that good, don't aim for the head, aim for their bombs. And if you can wait until his buddies are close by, even better.
In the final game, this is actually impossible though, and their bombs can't be blown up before they're thrown. The bombs are set as targetable in VATS, so I'm not sure why it doesn't work. It's likely related to the function that prevents the player from shooting weapons out of the hands of ghost people. It seems they meant to make an exception for gas bombs, but never had the opportunity to implement it. While you can return some clothing items to the vending machines for casino chips, it seems the developers forgot to add some items as recipes, like grimy pre-war business wear, pre-war baseball caps, and pre-war bonnets. Either that, or the list of clothing items that could be returned was made inconsistent on purpose. Vending machines are set up to allow the player to return fedoras for chips, but it was set to only accept a certain fedora called Outfit Fedora Hat. The problem with Outfit Fedora Hat is that this hat doesn't even appear in the DLC. It's only worn by the mysterious stranger and the dead investigator during the quest Beyond the Beef. Even then, this hat isn't marked as playable and can only be attained by using console commands. The player was clearly meant to have the option to return pre-war hats instead, an item that actually appears in Dead Money. There's a cut quest called Return to the Fountain. At some point, the quest was consolidated into the first objective of the quest, Fires in the Sky. Some of the radios in Salida del Sol South still check for Return to the Fountain, but since the quest is no longer used, these radios don't work either, making the area easier than it was meant to be. These radios appear to be functional otherwise, which has probably confused the players who have noticed them. Dean Domino's blackmail evidence is a holotape that can be found in the Tampico Theater. This recording reveals that Dean blackmailed Vera, threatening to reveal her Med-X addiction if she didn't continue with this plot to rob the casino vault. According to Dean's dialogue, he didn't know that Vera's Med-X addiction was caused by a terminal illness. This recording was supposed to be an important reveal of Dean's villainous past, but only the first line can play due to an oversight. There are notes that were intended for the voice actors you'd normally never see, and they give some interesting context to the scene.
Pretty as a picture.
Dean, I didn't hear you come in.
I'm not wearing my dancing shoes, so I walk a little softly now. What? You think I was a Chinaman? Come to cut your American throat.
Dean, really?
What? No hug? Come here.
Dean, I'm getting ready.
You sing like a bird, pop the safe, and we're as through can be.
About tonight, I don't know.
You don't know. I ask one simple favor of you, and you tell me no.
I didn't say no. I just said that I don't think...
You're right, you don't think. I don't need you. I'll send you back to the farm, worse off than you were, because you'll have seen the Sierra Madre and had to let it all go.
Dean's about to tell Vera she's going to do the job no matter what. Hollywood intentional.
I could have gotten any leggy dame out of Hollywood to get out here and play Sinclair's heartstrings. You just happened to be the one I caught. And it was really your own fault. A little too much into the chems and meds and...
Now Dean's softening her up, realizes he doesn't need her as an emotional wreck now.
Oh, shh, don't cry. Look, I'm not trying to hurt you. Just one last little job. A little less dirty. A little less messy. He trusts you, Vera. And so do I. After this, I promise you, all those other holotapes, they'll go away.
Dean's lying. He'll never stop using her or the blackmail.
Of course, Dean.
Quiet. Final doom down note. She's trapped. When activating the gala event, there's a short fireworks scene. Whoever worked on the scene made a series of mistakes with the NIF file that resulted in it looking far worse than it was meant to. I don't remember it looking this bad, but once you see it, it's hard to unsee. Here's how the fireworks were meant to look, and thankfully this was restored in the mod Dead Money Firework Fix. In Shining Armor was one of the new perks added in Dead Money, and its description reads, beams reflect off the mirror-like finish of your gleaming armor. You gain an additional +5 damage threshold against energy weapons while wearing any metal armor, +2 while wearing reflective eyewear. Which sounds pretty great, right? Unfortunately, this perk has a small mistake that causes it to provide no effect to any armor whatsoever. It checks to see if energy is being used against the player, but since the weapon skill is called energy weapons in the engine, and there's no skill called energy, this perk is never triggered. If you're playing on consoles or an unmodded PC version, this is the worst possible perk you could choose. The Executive Suites area saw a few notable changes in development. In the final game, the skeleton of Vera Keyes is found inside of her room, dead from an apparent chem overdose after being trapped by the casino security system. Vera Keyes has an unused model where she would have appeared as a ghoul. This would have implied she could have survived for years or even decades trapped inside the Sierra Madre before finally letting go and overdosing. Vera's death is already one of the most disturbing moments in New Vegas, and her becoming a ghoul would have only made it worse. This cut version of Vera wears a cut headpiece called Starlet's Wig, and it seems it was cut alongside the ghoul model. If it had made it in, it would have provided a +2 bonus to the player's damage threshold. There's an unused photo of Vera Keyes in Dead Money's game files. I'm not sure if its omission was a mistake or if it was cut deliberately, but it was later used in Old World Blues, where it can be found at the Z38 Light Wave Dynamics Research Lab. There's unused keys for the executive suites numbered up to 6, but one of them is missing from the game files. Perhaps it was too frustrating to have 6 unique keys, and they were cut as a result. In the final game, most of the doors in this cell can be lockpicked and don't require a unique key. There's a cut method of killing Christine. The code for this has a note that reads, "Player used terminal to set holograms to attack Christine on sight." However, this idea was never implemented, and the player is forced to use more boring methods. There's an unused door called Elevator Door 01 that was seemingly intended to lead from the executive suites to the vault. In the final game, a traditional elevator door was used instead. To unlock the elevator leading to the vault, the player needs to get a recording from the terminal in the casino lobby. However, the player originally needed to find 3 holotapes of various songs that were placed throughout the casino. They then needed to splice them together at the holotape machine found inside the theater to create the cut item spliced holotape, which could finally be used to unlock the vault elevator. There's unused code for this, and Elijah even has some cut lines about it. The vault has an audio lock, and it responds to the starlet's voice. We need to find more samples. A theater. It may have the recordings of the starlet's voice we need. Find the voice fragment and escape before your collar explodes. Look for more recordings of the starlet. Might be something in her possessions. Maybe she had an admirer here among the staff. Now piece together the words from her holotapes in the right sequence. What's wrong? Maybe you need to splice the fragments to make the phrase. The theater should have the tools you need to edit the tapes. It's likely this section was taking too long to play through, and was streamlined to quickly visiting the lobby terminal instead. Elijah has a substantial amount of unused dialogue contained in the quests that are used to make his dialogue play as the player explores the DLC. The quest objective tabs seem to have been used as a location for storing early dialogue. While some of these are exactly like the lines found in the final game, some of them have interesting exposition that was cut. In other cases, some lines have no equivalent in the final game and are downright fascinating. Followed the signal here because of that damn voice, promising to begin again. Pre-war nonsense, more like end again. Followed the Gala radio signal just like I did, hoping to strike it rich. Cooperate with me, follow along, we'll crack the Sierra Madre together. This must have been a paradise before the war, but no, radiation in the cloud ruined that dream. Those vending machines. Vending wasn't their intended use. They do so much more. Make the villa self-sufficient. Some of these lines are about the people Elijah kidnapped before the player. There were others like you, turned on each other even before the collars. Play your cards right, be smart, you'll live through it. Play dumb, well, your head wasn't much use to you anyway, was it? Collars weren't always linked to each other, a mistake. Others who came kept killing each other. Now I fixed that by linking them to each other. Sick of having to herd all of you through the villa. At least you're making more progress than the last team. So that's what happened to that one. Pray you don't end up like him. Greed killed him. Can kill you too. Maybe you think I wanted to send people here to inhale toxins, die, kill each other. Hardly. If robots could do this, I'd have sent them in. At one point, he would have accused the player of stealing their Pip-Boy. You sure have filled your Pip-Boy with garbage. Mitchell? That your name? Mitchell? No, wait. Previous owner. Vault 21, Vegas. No matter, not important. Probably stole this Pip-Boy from him, didn't you? Don't worry, if you're a thief is just what I need. He'd even give the player advice about sneaking. If you're trying to crawl and hide, don't turn on your Pip-Boy light. That light makes it easier for others to spot you. He also has several lines where he would have chastised the player for exploring. Deciding to explore, curiosity kills, get back on the main path. I mean it, if you die here, then this all starts over. Your detours are getting tiresome. What do you expect to find? A way to escape? No, I don't think so. Don't waste time trying to catch a glimpse of the Sierra Madre. He has several lines about the effect of the cloud as well. The villa's toxic. The more you're outside, the more you breathe. Then the cloud wins. So move fast. Don't stay outdoors too long. It's the cloud. Eats your inside slowly. Too much exposure, death. The cloud's thick in your area. Move east. Avoid the clouds. Don't test me or the cloud. Both will kill you without a second thought. In this line, Elijah reveals that Christine was his foster daughter, something that's never mentioned in the final game. You're resourceful, had a daughter, foster daughter like you. She was willful, stubborn, but clever. She's gone now, lost to me. This next cut line implies the player originally wasn't allowed to sleep or wait during the entire DLC. In the final game, you are allowed to sleep, just not in many locations. Try and run, disobey me, I'll set off your collar and find someone who knows how to listen. No sleeping, no waiting around, not even for an hour. Waste my time, you're useless to me. During my interview with Chris Avallone, I asked him about this cut, unrecorded dialogue. Elijah was originally supposed to hack your Pip-Boy, and he could communicate with you that way, as well as hide things he didn't want you finding. This was considered too far a departure from the original game's mechanics, and it was asked by Bethesda to be removed. While I liked the idea, I agree that it was probably too much for a DLC, especially with everything else we were trying to do with the DLCs with a limited staff. Tidbit, Dead Money originally had stupid dialogue for every player character line, but Bethesda couldn't afford localization for stupid text only, so we had to strip it out when they told us to cut it. Richard Hurd's voice acting as Elijah is one of the best elements of Dead Money, so it's a shame these lines were cut. Sadly, Richard Hurd passed away last year. After triggering the gala event at the bell tower, the player has to make it back to the gates of the Sierra Madre. A large number of ghost people are blocking your way, and it's arguably one of the most difficult sections in the entire game. There's evidence that it was even more difficult at one point in development. Elijah has a series of unrecorded lines that reveals the doors leading into the Sierra Madre were originally on a timer to close. I can hear the event firing off. Now get to the main doors quickly. Keep moving. The doors will close unless you get there in time. What's taking you so long? Get to the casino. Get there soon or the doors will seal and you'll be trapped outside. If the player had to rush their way past the ghost people and reach the gates before they closed, it could have made this sequence more tense and memorable. There's also a quest called Enemy Test that was used to test the Gala combat sequence, and it references 17 post-Gala ghost people, far more than what appears in the final game. There's also numerous references to enemies that were either deleted or disabled throughout development. It's possible some of them were deleted to balance certain areas and make them easier, but others were unfortunately cut due to consoles. A developer left a note that reads, "Disabling the ghosts that enter when the player reaches the balcony level to help with performance." This sequence is referred to internally as the Gala Gauntlet, which gives you an idea of the difficulty they intended. In a post on the Obsidian forums, Chris Avallone talked about how Dead Money's difficulty changed during development. Dead Money was actually initially a lot harder than its final release. All the hardcore mechanics in DLC 1 were par for the course in normal mode. It had a lot more traps, the toxic cloud was even more lethal. Rather than reduce you to low hit points in normal mode, it would kill you, and kill you faster than it did now. I did want the player to feel apprehensive while playing and create a sense of tension, but the end conclusion was that it was too punishing overall. Not challenging, punishing. One joke was that Dead Money was going to become the Tomb of Horrors of the Fallout universe. All I wanted was people to pay attention to the environment and space more. Feedback from Bethesda QA did provide a lot of good metrics for what felt right in terms of enemy strength, trap placement, and toxic cloud scaling, and we used a lot of those same feedback appraisals for future DLCs, so that's good. I did want the player to scavenge and scrounge, however, and see each last resource as precious. It was my way of trying to restore value to things Fallout players may now be taking taking for granted, and really, Stimpak should be an amazing find for any player living in the Fallout universe. There are several cut vending machine recipes where the player could trade in 5 Sierra Madre casino chips for a random item. These options never made it very far, as all of them are set up to give the player a junk food item. These cut options were Strange Chem, Surprise Aid Item, and Surprise Food. Each of these options was duplicated, then numbered 1 through 6, implying there were meant to be 3 more gambling options, but it seems this idea was abandoned before it got any further. Dead Money heavily features gambling, so these random options would have been a great inclusion. Luckily, these options were finally added into the game in the mod Surprise Vending Restoration. Another significant challenge the development team faced was a 10,000 line limit on how much dialogue could be recorded. They found creative ways to work around this limit by using environmental storytelling, graffiti, notes, and even characters like Dr. 8 in Old World Blues, who has no recorded dialogue at all. During my interview with lead producer Jason Bergman, I asked him why he imposed this limit. I love Chris Avellone to death. I have 3 favorite RPGs of all time, and one of them is Planescape Torment. The other 2 are Fallout 1 and Morrowind, but that guy likes to write. It was because of his overwriting that I set a hard limit on how many lines we could record for the DLC. I think it was 1,200 across all 4. It was a good challenge for them. The Dog/God boss fight is one of the most complex, memorable boss fights in New Vegas, so I asked area designer Robert Lee about his process for setting up this fight. Chris Avellone and I wanted to create a sense of urgency and impending doom. The concept at its core was Dog is going to blow up the casino if you don't stop him immediately. I looked at the gameplay tools we had and decided to go with gas rather than a simple bomb because it would force the player to either deal with the gas or use a limited set of weapons that don't ignite it. We started out with a large kitchen/restaurant space because we were concerned about AI pathing and detection issues. But after a white box review of the space, we decided it would be more engaging and dial up the urgency to shrink it down to its current size. It took a lot of testing and tuning of multiple scripts to pull off. Dog had to play a unique animation when lighting the fire, and the timing of the dialogue and scripting had to be carefully synced to cause the explosion and look right. All of the gas valves were set up to affect the quest script, which was constantly checking if the valves were on or off. The dialogue then also checked for multiple states. It was an incredibly complex setup that took a lot of work to get just right, but I think it worked out. I think players who save scum to see if there were alternate choices probably appreciated the variety. It's this attention to detail and design mindfulness of player agency that set Obsidian apart from the pack. Vera Keyes was in a film called Love Set Sail, and the poster for it pays homage to many of the DLC's inspirations. The director's name is Andrew Levine, a mixture of BioShock's antagonist Andrew Ryan and the game's creative director Ken Levine. BioShock's inspiration can be seen in the DLC's Art Deco architecture, the vending machines, and the way that both the Sierra Madre and Rapture are abandoned utopias whose former inhabitants have been transformed in a horrific way. The name Vince Natali is a reference to Vincenzo Natali, the director of the 1997 cult classic horror film Cube. Cube revolves around a group of complete strangers having to work together to escape a series of trap-filled rooms, much like Dead Money's first act. The name Mike Berlin is a reference to the designer of the 1983 text-based game Suspended, a cryogenic nightmare. In it, the player is trapped in suspended animation and must control 6 robots to save themselves. This premise is similar to the way Elijah is trapped inside the Sierra Madre and must control the player and their team to complete his objective. The overall style of this poster is a reference to Alfred Hitchcock's 1944 film Lifeboat, which follows a group of survivors in a lifeboat after their ship is sunk by a German U-boat, and explores the strengths and weaknesses of people under duress. The 90s sci-fi reimagining of Lifeboat, Life Pod, also served as inspiration. In the film Battle Royale, students are outfitted with explosive collars and forced to fight each other to the death, much like Elijah's explosive collars. If the player reads Sinclair's personal logs, they'll find a letter meant for Dean Domino, and reading it traps them inside the vault forever. There's a line in this letter that reads, "And I will raise my glass and say Fortunato." This is a reference to Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado, a short story where the main character seals up another character behind a brick wall and leaves him to die. The Ghost People are a clear reference to an episode of Doctor Who, in which a plague transforms its victims into gas mask zombies. Obsidian paid homage to this by including a line from the episode in graffiti that can be found while using the Wild Wasteland trait. Dead Money was most heavily inspired by the 1948 John Huston film The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, which revolves around three men traveling to Mexico in search for gold. Many of Dead Money's overarching themes can be seen in the film, like the corrupting influence of greed. At the end of the movie, the protagonists discover the gold, but end up losing it and have to let go of their obsession, much like the gold bars in the Sierra Madre vault being too heavy to carry out. The developers paid homage to it numerous times as well, most notably by naming the casino after it. Another example is the Tampico Theater, which is a reference to the location where the film starts, Tampico, Mexico. The police pistol was based on the Cult Official Police, a .357 shown off prominently in the film. Many elements from Black Isle's cancelled Fallout 3 were recycled for New Vegas, and the DLCs were no exception to this. In an interview, Chris Avellone revealed how Elijah was intended to appear in Van Buren. Elijah was supposed to be one of the companions in the first iteration of Fallout Van Buren, along with Sulik's sister, who, ironically enough, was a slaver. Elijah was a genius-level Brotherhood of Steel member who deserted the organization, which was becoming increasingly xenophobic due to faction politics, rigid adherence to tech over community, and continual dangerous use of Stealth Boy tech despite numerous warning signs. Like the Nightkin, the Stealth Boy was beginning to fray some Brotherhood of Steel personalities, causing paranoia and psychosis. Overall, Elijah felt that the Brotherhood of Steel had been poisoned by wrapping itself within a tech shell. Veronica did not exist. Elijah was also a bit more physically fit than his Dead Money counterpart and was skilled in not just high-tech weapons, but also had trained himself extensively in bows, spears, and more old-school weapons that many Brotherhood of Steel members disdained as being tribal. Before Elijah deserted, however, he sabotaged the Brotherhood of Steel power armor so they could do no more aggression/harm to other communities in the Waste, including NCR, and he sabotaged their armor as a lesson: who you are without these tech shells that distance you from the world. After this, he went on to live with the Cypher Tribals. One of the arcs of the game is to convince him to resurrect the power armor so the Brotherhood of Steel isn't wiped out, or activate it for a new group of Brotherhood of Steel, including the player, or follow the Cyphers, who understand tech better than the Brotherhood of Steel do. They worship schematics of the old world.
You did? Where? Oh my god, I thought... I don't even know what I thought might have happened to him. But you don't have a "this is good news" expression on your face.
Veronica is the only core game character that has new lines after the completion of a DLC. During my interview with Jason Bergman, I asked him about the DLC's development and how her dialogue was recorded. DLC wasn't worked on in earnest until post-ship, and we pretty much released them as we completed them. The only DLC we knew we would do was Joshua Graham, although only Josh Sawyer knew for sure what his story would be. And we figured we'd come back to Veronica's story, which is how we recorded those lines with Felicia Day that only play post-Dead Money, but with those, we had no idea where they would be used. It's implied that Christine and Veronica were in a relationship, but unfortunately they couldn't record new lines for Veronica due to the cost of voice acting. Josh Sawyer revealed why there isn't more post-DLC dialogue in a Formspring post. I cannot speak for Chris Avallone, who wrote and directed Dead Money, but I believe we were limited by time/scheduling. Veronica was written and recorded for the base New Vegas game, with only a few hooks for Dead Money. I think reactions to Dead Money content itself would have required a more comprehensive level of way advanced planning, i.e., we would have needed to know exactly what Veronica was reacting to in Dead Money at the time we recorded her for New Vegas. Either that, or we would have needed to book Felicia Day for more studio time during the development of Dead Money. That can also be difficult and expensive, especially since voice actors and studio time are generally booked in multiple hour blocks. It's difficult to justify if the character is only saying 2 or 3 new lines. It also gets a little messy when trying to decide where to draw the line. I think a lot of people would love to see some resolution between Christine and Veronica, but what about Caesar responding to the events of Honest Hearts? I wrote Joshua Graham and directed Honest Hearts, so I can speak more definitively to that. The limited reactivity Caesar could have about Joshua Graham/Honest Hearts wouldn't really justify the expense of bringing John Doman back into the studio. And of course, the new dialogue, minor as it might be, would still need to be tested. Caesar had one of the most complex dialogues in New Vegas, so it's something we really tried to avoid messing with once the game shipped. I know that might sound a little silly, but because recording expenses can be high, and recording sessions typically happen late in development, it's often safer to err on the side of caution. In a separate post, Josh Sawyer continued, "There are technical reasons that I've gone over before for why DLC characters can't come back into the main game/reference each other. That's separate from any narrative reasons why Christine and Veronica couldn't interact. Though I should say I can see Veronica's FNV plot arc before/separately from what Chris Avallone developed for Dead Money. I think Veronica is relatively happy, an important qualifier in a setting where most things are miserable, and any tragedy in her ending slides has more to do with the state of the Brotherhood of Steel than her personal relationships. Most other companions don't speak of their romantic relationships. Arcade and Cassidy mention some in passing, but nothing in particular. Boone's wife is the source of a lot of personal anguish. You could make the argument that Boone's or Veronica's relationships are more tragic than the other, but both of them qualify as not good. Dead Money has several interesting cut notes. The first note is called Too Hot, and it would have appeared at the Cafe Madrid terminal. One of the cooks noticed their knife was glowing the other day. They'd left it on the stovetop, and the metal started glowing red, and it didn't cool down. What kind of space-age metal is this cosmic knife made of? It kept glowing hot for several hours, and then the knife was so weak that when we tried to use it, it simply snapped. Guess that's why the metal's not used in rockets. The next cut note is called Sinclair EBE, and it was meant to appear at the hologram control terminal inside the casino, but it's never given to the player due to an oversight. Despite not appearing in the English release of Dead Money, this oversight was strangely fixed in the Russian localization. Mr. Sinclair, I took the points you raised in the call today to heart, and I hope my answers offered some reassurance. What we are providing is an exclusive, comprehensive technology, but more importantly, we want to address the concerns you raised for protecting your guests from threats, specifically the growing communist threat from the Chinese. Security is NE's top concern. There is no reason to provide a service that you cannot defend, and should the current world situation lead to increased hostilities, an emergency broadcast emitter has been placed inside select hologram emitters at the Sierra Madre. In case of nuclear attack, holograms will defend their stations with lethal force to protect guests under their charge. If you wish to make sure that those who come to your villa and casino have the means to defend themselves, I assure you, you need to look no further than the EBE. It is a proven technology, and anyone who decides to attack you or your guest will regret any aggression. Martin T. Harris. P.S. Any chance we could ask you to have Miss Key sign an autograph for us? It won't reduce the price, although I could see about sending a few extra systems your way. The last cut note we'll be looking at is called Shipment Invoice, and it likely would have appeared somewhere in the villa. Shipments got routed again, and what was meant for the casino restaurant ended up in the villa for the umpteenth time. Hauling those crates of knives up to the main lobby ain't gonna be my job, especially with no cars. In a post on the Obsidian forums, Chris Avallone spoke about Dead Money's design at length. Dead Money is a short story in the Fallout universe, Pulp Fiction style. It's a dime store comic book, issue 1 in a limited series. An adventure story, a casino heist with a post-Holocaust spin. It's never intended to have the length of a regular product, and being able to do a game short story is something that was fun to work on. Usually we work on multi-year products, so doing a one-off with limited scope in a short time frame was gratifying in many respects. How do you create a game equivalent $10 versus dime store paperback adventure? How long should it be? How should you present it? As it says at the outset, Dead Money is a brutal, vicious adventure that puts the player in a bad situation. And it was designed to scare the hell out of Fallout players, although it didn't, in my opinion. The survival and tension aspects ended up trumping that, which is fine, since survival's a subset of fear in my book. We didn't set out to make Dead Money a survival experience, we set out to make a horror game that puts survival second. In terms of horror, I don't think we succeeded, although it was a conscious effort to try and shake things up a bit with the enemies you face to scare the player, definitely. The enemies are not only tough, which is easy to do with numbers, so I don't feel that's a real challenge, but also intended to be unpredictable when they fall, so you couldn't always count on shooting an enemy until they fall as being a guarantee that you're safe. The original hope was that enemies couldn't simply be headshotted continuously. This is a selfish reason, as I got tired of watching people play like that non-stop. It doesn't feel like they're experimenting with limb targeting tactics, despite the array of weapons. Although the non-headshotting tactical diversion didn't turn out that way. It's just as easy to decapitate a head as a limb with the right blast. So why did we choose survival? Well, the question of survival sums up questions I've had about Fallout as its timeline advances. The post-Wastelands gotten more civilized as the decades since the nuclear war have gone on, and when I was scripting Dead Money's layout, one thing that kept coming up was that I missed the desperate road warrior feeling when I hit the waste. I miss being in a situation where I'm scrounging for every last bullet, water's precious, and I have to fight tooth and nail for any edge I can get. That goes double for the environment. I want it to be terrifying and something you're constantly fighting against, Vault 34 style. I confess, there's been times I wish someone would drop more nuclear warheads on the Fallout world, if only to bring back parts of its roots, so I wanted to create an area in the wasteland that felt just as desperate as you'd expect a post-Holocaust environment to be. So the Sierra Madre and its surrounding villa were designed as a reminder that some sections of the waste are still scary, hazardous places where few can tread and survive, and while NCR may tame parts of the Mojave, there are other parts they can never hope to settle and claim as their own, and that's just the way I want it. Regardless, we were shooting for a horror experience with Dead Money. As for what we tried to do with horror to make the game scary, we tried to do two things. One, have enemies you couldn't headshot and required a different approach, holograms, toxic cloud, and worse, they could headshot you if you weren't careful, bomb collars plus radios. My experience with most horror games is that the enemies become scarier when you can't kill the adversaries, which most role players will try and do if the enemy has any number of hit points or any measurable way to hurt them, no matter how small. So what I am happy about, even if the final result ended up veering from the intention, is watching YouTube playthrough videos where folks 1. Start panicking when they hear beeping, exactly the experience we wanted, and 2. Seeing players take a step back, figure out the puzzle, and then study the environment to solve it. Again, what we wanted. As for horror, things get scarier or intense when you can't escape. No one's coming to help you, and your resources are limited, and Dead Money was built around this. Watching the YouTube playthrough footage where players started reappreciating chems and stim packs made me happy. These things are miracles of medicine, and they should be viewed as such and appreciated for that in the world of Fallout. One issue I've always had with Fallout is that it's really easy to amass a lot of chems and stems, so much so you lose the sense of wonder and relief when you get those items. And I feel situations like in Dead Money can give you a new appreciation for food, crafting. We put a higher priority on crafting and supplies to make crafting worth more in the DLC. Unconventional water sources, and the joy at finding an otherwise common chem in the Mojave takes on a new level of preciousness when you're in hostile territory. One YouTube video showed someone finding Buffout, and to hear them say thank God, and hear genuine appreciation for finding something so rare, is exactly the kind of value I want people to attach to these items. Usually people seem to care less when they find Buffout, but it all depends on the environment context. I want players to attach value to them again, rather than, oh, more Buffout. It's Buffout, it's a stim pack. Your characters should be overjoyed to find these things each and every time. We also wanted to maximize the real estate. We couldn't build a whole other world for a DLC, so we paid more attention to what we put into it and increased the gameplay density. We did a serious, quantified exploration and loot pass, included challenges that required paying attention to your surroundings, hazards above and below, hidden cache markers to encourage targeted exploration and navigation, second-story adventure areas, and even putting crafting items on walls. Artists spend a lot of time fleshing out rooms and environments, so we wanted to include challenges and rewards for folks who carefully hunted through the environments and were rewarded for their efforts. In short, make them pay attention to their surroundings. Dead Money's story. Narratives in games should be entertaining first, and also have a theme when possible. I wanted to make sure that despite the survival elements and the adventure story elements, there's still something larger being told beneath the DLC's surface for people who care to delve into it. There's a thematic spine that we built the characters and the Sierra Madre, which most folks appreciated, and our lead level designer put the finishing touches on. Thanks, Charlie. That was brilliant. I feel when your adversary sums up his frustrations with the human condition, and you get to see the results of what bomb collars do to 4 or 5 individuals who would normally butcher / devour / assassinate / con each other, that's the point. But it's reflected in the design as well, notably their perks. The idea was always intended that if you talk to them and study their abilities, you see how they can help you survive much easier as long as you cooperate and choose the right companion for the right time. A level of cooperation that would be impossible if your lives weren't tied to each other. And when Elijah snarls about that exact issue, I wanted players to realize that as much as they may hate him, he's got a point in this situation. There's a few other things I'm happy with and always wanted to do, and I'm glad DLC allows for experimentation with this. Having an opening narration movie per location is something I've wanted ever since running Van Buren pen and paper games at Black Isle, and thanks to Bethesda for being on board with that. Reactive inslides per DLC, having a join the bad guy Fallout 1 style end movie, which I missed ever since joining the Master's Army in Fallout 1, so we put it in DLC 1 to allow the player to join Elijah. And being able to hook into some of the backstories in previous Fallouts, as well as Mojave hooks. Veronica's relationship with her mentor, who Dean Domino really was, and Dog/God's ties back to the origins of Nightkin, and how some folks have exploited that in the present. A few last minor things that make me happy that doing a DLC gave a chance to experiment with. I got to finally try to write a Torment, they communicate everything via text character for a modern-day role-playing game with Christine to see how it would be received. Mixed reaction. Some people thought we were lazy or cheap, and they're partly right, even if that wasn't the intention. Voice acting is expensive, and if we can get more story with less voiced words, I'm fine with that. Wouldn't have gone over so well in a larger game, I suspect, so glad the DLC allowed for it. So while I have mixed feelings about the DLC, I'm pretty happy with it. And I like the fact the way the DLCs are structured allows for some degree of experimentation. And the price of admission and the amount of gameplay Dead Money provides, including explorers, there's a lot to find even in supposedly confined world spaces. I'm more than happy with it in the end, as difficult as it can be at times even for veteran players. I always figured if folks had played F3 and FNV for 100 plus or more hours total, they may be ready for the stakes to be raised. I also like the fact that DLCs can have continuity. They don't need to exist in isolation. If I had to picture the DLC series, it would be a limited series in the Fallout universe, spiraling to its final conclusion that brings everything back to the start, so Dead Money sets a nice pattern for future FNV DLCs, especially layout and narrative-wise, which folks have picked up on, and many thanks to them. Dead Money's development was heavily affected by a short development cycle, memory constraints, and a limit on how much dialogue could be recorded. Despite the odds, Obsidian went all in on a DLC that's significantly different from the core game, and in some ways, is superior to it. Many factions, areas, and quests feel unfinished in New Vegas, but Dead Money is a more complete, more tonally consistent experience that sets the bar for what downloadable content can aspire to be. Some of these changes would have made New Vegas into an even better game. Ultimately though, all of this was left on the cutting room floor.